Hello and welcome to another episode of the Your Way podcast. So I am delighted to have a guest on this week. So I have Kamal Aggarwall with me. And I'm delighted, but also a little bit sad that we've got to however many episodes of this podcast. And Kamal, you are the first male guest. So welcome. It's lovely to have you here. And at the same time, it would be lovely to have more male representation on here because, as far as I'm concerned, we all need support. So, hello and welcome.
Pleasure.
Do you want to tell people just a little bit about you in whatever way that looks, however you want to define who you are, just so people have got a little bit of an idea.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Kamal. I'm a tax director in the professional services industry, coming up to being married for 9 years this week. And I am the father to my delightful 6-year-old girl.
I can't believe she's 6.
Hmm.
That's gone fast, hasn't it?
It does, yeah.
So I worked with Kamal starting in, I think it was 2021 that we started working together. We aren't currently working together. We worked together for about 18 months, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And over that time, you had lots of shifts, and one of the things that I really noticed was, in my language, this increase in resilience and self-trust. So that willingness to be like, this is what I want, this is what I stand for, this is what I think, and I'm going to express that to the world or whoever wanted to listen. And interestingly, you also did a coach certification yourself because you recognized that actually helping people is really important to you. So that was a kind of quite a long, wide-ranging introduction / question. So take it wherever you want to go. But for you, what did learning to back yourself look like? And maybe if we take a step back from that, what did it look like for you? Like, what was life like before those changes happened?
So I think, Louise, the trigger for me wanting to work with you was I recognized primarily at work that I was very dependent on external validation.
Mm.
And I needed to shift that because that meant that I was sometimes acting in ways which I wasn't comfortable with, but because it would give me the external validation, and I was holding myself back from opportunities where it wasn't supported by people that I felt I needed to be supported by. And I recognized that in myself, but I was really struggling to shift that, and what were the steps I needed to break away from that pattern, because I recognized it was putting limitations on me.
Yeah.
And then with working with you as part of your group program and showing up every week for over quite a long period, we started to take small incremental steps away from that. And I think all the steps were almost imperceptible in themselves. But then when you step back and you look back and you think how much you've shifted over a year or 6-month period, you realize the impact has been quite significant. And it was just through talking openly with you and being challenged on some of my thoughts and some of my beliefs, and you encouraging me to look at things in a different way. And they started to really kind of resonate on that almost visceral level.
Yeah.
And I've taken that forward with me now. So I think that's, to answer your question in a broad way, that's kind of what it looked like. And I'm noticing now that even though we stopped working together, I've put myself forward for positions which I know I don't have backing for. And even know that the likelihood of me succeeding is against me. But I thought, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, because the worst that's going to happen is I'll get feedback telling me where I need to focus on things.
Yeah.
So,
and I love that. And this, what I'm about to say, might not completely resonate and ring true with you, but I think so often we hold ourselves back. We don't allow ourselves to put ourselves forward for opportunities because there is this fear of how crushed we would be to be rejected or to have someone say no to us. And I think from what you're saying, actually, when you get to that place of, well, I don't need that external validation because I'm going to back myself and trust myself, it means that whatever the outcome is, you get to continue to be kind to yourself and to back yourself and to maintain your self-worth and your self-esteem because it's no longer reliant on, well, I asked to do this thing and they said yes. And that now means that I'm allowed to be kind to myself because somebody else said that I was good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 So I think for me, Louise, it was, if I put down to the root, it was almost a fear of being laughed at or a fear of being taken, having the mick taken, which was really holding me back. So that's kind of what the shift I've taken away from. And I think if people want to laugh now, that's their business. And
Yeah.
more often not, these fears are in your head, they're not actually real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And they're either in your head or they're kind of based on something that happened a long, long time ago when maybe
Mm.
you were laughed at or someone did take the mick out of you. And then there's still that kind of, like you said before, that visceral response of, well, if I
Mm.
do this thing, then I'm going to have this same experience. And again, getting to that place of actually they can laugh and I can survive that.
Mm.
And then realizing that the reality is, oh, but they're not going to laugh.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I love that. So you answered my very broad question quite broadly, and don't worry if you can't think of anything, but you talked about, so, prior to us working together, that you'd had some situations where you maybe hadn't taken your natural, authentic course of action because you were worried about what other people think. Is there an example that you feel comfortable sharing just so people can kind of have a tangible example?
Yeah, I think one which really one which I remember was when I was being in the professional services industry and trying to sell work to clients. There
Mm,
was a couple of cases where I was almost being pushed to sell work which I knew clients didn't need.
mm,
And that's not really where I wanted to come at it from. I wanted to come from how can I add most value? And then that will then generate the numbers I need, not in terms of trying to flog things,
yeah.
which was not needed. And actually it ended up making some quite significant shifts as a result of that and how I approach now, how I approach selling now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. My middle sister retrained as an independent financial advisor during the pandemic. And it's one of the things that she said that she comes up against is this strong desire to help people and support people and only really to even suggest products to them that they desperately
Mm.
need. But she's in an industry where that is not the norm,
Mm.
unfortunately. She's in an industry where people are just bothered about their commission and how do I flog all of this stuff to people. And again, I think that willingness to come back to, well, no, these are my values. This is how I want to show up. This is what I want to
Mm.
offer. I'm going to trust that I will get the numbers that I need to get, but in a way that is in integrity to how I am.
Mm.
But it's a big deal to get there in a space where there are pressures to meet financial metrics, and you might be surrounded by other people that don't necessarily have the
Mm.
same values as you.
No, absolutely. And it's actually, it was after I showed up, I mean, if I can use the phrase, as my more authentic self and
Mm,
tried to be very open and very sort of, try and put integrity at my core. That's when I started actually getting more opportunities because
mm.
that's when people with whom my message was resonating started reaching out to me more proactively and saying, I like the way you approach this. So can you help with X, Y, Z? Or why don't you come and join my team? And so it was quite refreshing to see that was the end result of that.
Yeah. And I think that's so powerful. I want to kind of reinforce that because often we think if we allow our true selves to come through, we are authentic, if we do lead from values and we do put the clients first, and but maybe against the like overall thing of like how things are being done in the team, that we potentially do things that are career limiting moves. We isolate ourselves, we don't fit in. And actually, what you've just said is so, so important that when we do show up, express, say what we
Mhm.
think in a way that works for us, people who are on that same plane for
Mhm.
want of a better phrase, are like, oh, he's my person.
Mhm.
He's my kind of person. So yeah, I'd like him in my space because that's the kind of that's the kind of person I want to work with. That's the kind of person I want to put myself around. And I should ask you about this in a minute. Interesting about how it then also impacts things like friendships and stuff outside of the workplace. You know, when you show up, all of a sudden you attract your kind of people. So you have a nicer experience of life and a more authentic experience of life. Whereas for a lot of people, they think they need to keep wearing the mask and pretend and like do what other people want them to do. And they never ever get to have that authentic connection.
Very true.
And so have you noticed a difference in the kind of friendship? I mean, it could even just be relationships with work colleagues, but sort of friendships outside of the office when
I
you're a
think
little bit more.
I say my friends outside the office have remained relatively consistent.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
one thing I have actively done is I have stopped interacting with people who I see as toxic. And these are not people I was sort of interacting with on a day-to-day basis and in any event, but it's more that I've sort of cut them off social media feeds and etc. So I just don't want to be within their orbit. And it's enriched the relationships I do have. And it's made me very grateful actually for those friends who have backed me from day one. I've always been there, and
Yeah.
it's kind of reinforced the strength of the relationship I have with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a really, really special thing to have.
Mm.
And so if you think now about backing yourself and the I guess the opportunities maybe that it has afforded you that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have had. And we'll never know if you would or not, but
Mm.
just on a working assumption, what opportunities have you had?
I suppose with my current role, in fact,
Yeah.
I was I was not actively looking for a role. I knew I would be moving soon, but I wasn't actively out in the market. But I ended up getting messaged by a former colleague who said he liked what I'd been doing, and he'd be keen to back my entry to my current firm because that's the culture he wanted to build within the team. And so it just really saved a big job search because it meant that
Mm.
I was able to be
Yeah.
contributed to a role I'm really enjoying.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And to be kind of headhunted
Mhm.
because of who you are,
Hmm. Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is, yeah,
Yeah, because it wasn't so much my work product, it was
yeah.
more around the cultural attributes I could bring.
And again, I know I keep reinforcing this, but I think so many people think if I'm going to work in corporate, I'm going to do these things. I need to essentially be this kind of robot that shows up and delivers and does all of these different pieces. And there's no space for me to be a human and there's no space for X, Y, and Z. But actually, what you're saying is, well, the more human I allowed in,
Mhm.
the more me I allowed in, the more opportunities presented.
Yeah,
Is
very
that
much.
fair?
That's very much fair. Very much fair. And also, I was very conscious, Louise, that when we first started working together, I was very, very conscious that the way I showed up and the way I presented would impact my daughter as well.
Mm,
So, in order to be able to role model good behaviors for her, I knew I needed to shift a few things because I was very conscious about that and just thinking about because she is ultimately my legacy to the next generation.
mm, yeah. And what changes, if anything, have you noticed in your not well, maybe in your parenting style, but I'm not actually sure that that changed that much. 'Cause I think you
Mm,
were always like pretty on it.
mm.
But maybe they have. But also in terms of how you are role modeling for her, what she's seeing, like what would you say are the benefits there?
Well, I think the biggest one is I own the fact that for a long time I took a bit of a step away from my career, as in I
Mm,
still showed up for my career, but I wasn't pushing for promotion for a long time because I was focused on family
mm,
and I was giving space for my wife to be able to focus on the sort of breadwinner role while I focus much more on the day-to-day parenting.
yeah.
And I think if I was looking for external validation for that kind of role, that probably wouldn't exist. but that's not the validation I needed. I needed the only validation that really mattered in this is what the three of us together thought and the outcome we got from that. And it gave me a lot of peace with that decision, because I know it's easy to say it was an easy decision, but there's a lot of what's called toxic masculinity to unpick, and a lot of cultural sort of baggage there to unpick to get to that position.
Yeah. And then the reality of the world is that actually what you've got to do is, because my perspective, I appreciate that things like might have gone differently if you'd done things a different way, but you still have a big job and incredible career.
Mhm.
And you gave yourself permission to take that time to really focus on being a dad and to build
Mm.
those relationships with your daughter and to get to enjoy her when she was little.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's going to come a point where she doesn't want to be seen in the same room as me, but there is it's really precious now that we have this relationship, that she she wants to be seen with me. She wants to show me off, and I'm the one she comes to when she needs something. It is quite nice. And then I say, I mean, the reality is there will become a point where she becomes a teenager, and I become the classic sort of dad embarrassment, or when she's going to naturally gravitate towards her mother for certain developmental issues.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
nice that we've got this foundation now, which will hopefully carry through for many decades to come.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes a huge difference. And I think that's such a good point as well, because it's very, very easy, particularly when people are sort of quite driven by personal development and
Mm.
they like to look at things and all the rest of it. It's very easy when you have children to to get quite concerned actually that you're going to pass on your negative traits to your kids, or you're going to ruin your kids, or like terrible things are going to happen. And there can then be this, particularly with people that I work with who generally tend to be mums, but some dads too, but the mums seem to really worry about it, that they need to do all of this work because otherwise that way they don't want to pass on this stuff to their kids. And that's a very valid reason for doing the work and looking at the work. And at the same time, and please feel free to disagree with me and correct me if you don't agree with this, but actually for you, it was a part of it, but it wasn't all of it, because what you recognized was, I need to do this work for me.
Mhm.
And as part of that, I'm also then going to get to enjoy the ripples that flow from this work.
Yeah, no, I would fully agree with that, Louise. I wouldn't disagree with any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, and the reason why I think, again, why this is so important is because it can feel absolutely impossible for
Mm.
many, many people to just say, I'm going to do this work just for me, just for the sake of doing the work, because I want to feel better, because I want to stop needing so much external validation, because I want to be able to back myself. Like, because I am important enough to do this work just for myself.
Mhm.
And I think that is also, it's also quite rare, because we don't necessarily get brought up knowing that we are important enough to just decide that we want to do this stuff for ourselves.
Yeah, no, it is good to just invest in yourself back, and I suppose it's another expression of backing yourself.
Yeah.
That investing yourself,
Yeah.
knowing that you'll get. I mean, not that I see it as like a monetary investment, but you do get a good return on your
Mm.
investment in terms of headspace and
Yeah.
outcomes.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, sometimes there is, even if it's not immediately obvious, because if you then end up going for a job and you get a pay rise and other stuff happens because you're backing yourself,
Mhm.
there can be a financial return on investment. And you're right. Also, how do you value having a different quality and experience of life?
Mhm.
It's tricky, but it is valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what does the future of backing yourself look like? Have you got any plans in the pipeline? Any next steps?
I think backing myself means that if we talk about on a work level, it means going into meetings knowing that I bring value
Mm,
and showing up in that way. and showing up to sort of sales calls or to such events and knowing that I've got something to contribute,
Yeah.
that there's no sense of, obviously there's always going to be some, but there's no overriding sense of imposter syndrome or feeling like I don't belong in the room.
Yeah.
Sometimes leave a room thinking maybe that was the wrong room for me to be in, because,
Yeah, sure.
but that doesn't mean I didn't have value. It just might not be value that resonates with that particular client. But that's fine. I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And building that relationship with them and being able to show up authentically. That's what it
Yeah.
means. And
Amazing.
then outside of work, it also means that backing myself means I can be completely unapologetic about the life choices I've made.
Mm.
So where I haven't sort of focused on career in the same way I did in my 20s for a few
Yeah.
years, that means I don't need to explain that away or justify it.
Yeah.
It's a decision I've made, and I think the results in terms of my family unit will speak for themselves in that sense. Not that I need to point to those results, but it is just you do it and you do it with by being true to yourself and being relaxed and in complete peace with that decision.
Yeah. And being in complete peace with that decision, what impact does that have on you in your day to day when you're showing up, when you're around people? What do you notice?
I just noticed that it's that everything, I mean, things are never going to be completely worry-free or never, because these things are never like black or white. But it means that, for example, if I need to do pickup, which I do most days, school pickup, I don't feel the need to hide that or justify and pretend it's a doctor's appointment. I
Mm.
say I'm going to do school pickup.
Yeah.
So that's just like a mental load away. I think obviously the modern working world helps more than it would have 10 to
Mm.
15 years ago.
Yeah. And
Mm.
when you said then about like that's a mental load away, that was one of the things I was thinking about. Surely just showing up without having to sort of second guess or think about everything.
Mhm.
I mean, this is just my reaction. So again, you don't need to react, you don't need to agree, but just that it would be less exhausting. Like it would just be less exhausting to go through life from a place of this is what I'm doing rather than like, well, what do I need to tell them I'm doing? Or how do I need to explain this? Or how do I justify this? It's like, here I am. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree. It is nice and it's surprising. I suppose it shouldn't be a surprise, but it's been very pleasantly surprising about just how, and I mean this in a positive way, indifferent people are.
Mm, mm,
That you're going to do, nobody's like, I mean, there might be the odd person, but the overwhelming majority of people aren't judging you for doing school pickup or drop off. It is what it is. And if anything, as I'm getting a bit more sort of senior and older in my career as well, you're giving permission for others to do the same as well.
I love that. That reminds me of the Marianne Williamson quote, which I still
Mm,
go to from time to time. In fact, my so when I worked with Kamal, we did some stuff around. So there's a Marianne Williamson quote, which is basically like around our deepest fear, and actually when we show up, we give other people permission to do the same.
mm,
Um, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, it is that we are powerful beyond measure. I cannot do the whole thing, but that's how it starts if anyone wants to Google it. Interestingly, my therapist, probably about 6 weeks ago, I was like, do you know this quote? I was like, I do know that quote. Um, but I
mm,
think that's so important. And I know we've obviously talked about that quote lots in the
mm,
past. Actually, you're right. When we show up, when you show up, you do give other people permission to do the same,
mm. Yeah,
which is a
absolutely.
beautiful thing.
And it's just great number of clients who have said to me, it's great that you do that. And it's great. And so the overwhelming majority I work with are always very, very accommodating.
Mm,
And
yeah,
more often than not, they're often dealing with some of the same kind of working juggle. And so just showing a bit of give and take on both sides is exceptionally powerful.
yeah, amazing. So I kind of alluded to it a little bit before, but you did do a coaching qualification. So you've done lots of this work, you've done the qualification, you've got some tools. So my final question to you before I ask you if there's anything else that you would like to share is if you were going to give if someone came to you and said, Camel, help me, I would love to learn how to back myself,
Mhm.
and you were going to give them, I don't know, some steps or some things to look at, what would be your advice?
I would ask them to go, don't really like the expression, but can't think of a better one now. to go deep and
Mm.
think about the times when they've really done something they're proud of, looking back,
Yeah.
and think what are the commonalities there? What happened that made that a successful point for you? And by successful, I mean what is something that's personally successful, not externally successful. So that made it feel like a success for them. And then I think more often than not, you'll see that is because they had some sort of belief in themselves or belief in right. And then you get to start to reinforce that to your reptilian brain, really, to get that positive cycle of reinforcement. When you back yourself, success happens.
Mm.
It may not be immediate, but it will happen. And then you start to give yourself that positive reinforcement cycle. And then I think linked to that, Louise, is really understand, and it's a bit of a process to get there, but what does success mean to you?
Mm.
And that's going to be very different and very personal to every person. For some people, it's going to be huge career success at a young age. For others, it's going to be having a work-life balance and being able to be at home for 5 or 6 o'clock. And what's the definition that works for you? And then what are the steps you need to do to put there, which often comes back to just backing yourself to embrace your definition of success. And I say this because I talk to a lot of dads on the school run that I do. And for some, it's they want to be in the office every day doing long hours because it gives them a very high income. And obviously I've made different choices, but one is not better than the other. I mean, I certainly
Mm.
don't see myself as more a better dad or a worse dad than them. It's just that they've taken the view that that's what works for them,
Mhm.
which is amazing because it means that in one sense it means you can provide a very high standard of living where money never has to be an issue.
Yeah.
And for others, it's a different view or somewhere in between. So that's a
Yeah.
bit of a rambling response to your question.
No, it was a brilliant response. And what I love is that thing about actually, we don't need to put a value on this stuff. Everybody gets to make their own choices and carve their own path to just to like shoehorn in the name of the podcast, do it their way, right? I'm like, so actually, this might be my choice and this might be my choice. And I love what you came back down to of, okay, well, what is my version of success? And being super clear that it is actually your version of success. So it's like, this is not the version of success that maybe my dad gave to me, or my school teacher
Mm.
gave to me, or Aunt Sally gave to me one day. It's like, how do I want to define a successful life? And then how do I go about and make that happen? So I
And I
love
would just
that.
add to that, Louise, as well, is having the conviction and backing yourself enough to be able to change that definition
Mm,
whenever you want, because what's successful for you in one stage of your life may look very different at a later stage.
yes, yes, very, very, very
Mm.
true. So, as we come up to the end, is there anything that you would like to share or talk about today that I haven't asked you?
Um, Good question. I would say that probably the superpowers I would ascribe to myself is I live life with a lot of gratitude. That
Mm,
every day I write down a few things I'm grateful for. And I think that's been my biggest bridge um, to some of my best actions.
mm,
Now, on the flip side, I fully recognize that I'm still very much a work in progress of everything I've said. I mean, nothing is clear cut. I said I've come a long way in my need for external validation. I'm not all the way there. I still do need some external validation.
yeah.
That's probably never going to go away. And I'd say that what I said, my superpower being gratitude. I think the flip side to my biggest weakness is my inability to let go of a grudge. That's,
Mm,
and I think that's almost two sides of the same coin.
yeah.
And it's something I'm really trying to focus on at the moment is learning to let go of stuff.
Mm,
So to answer your question is anything left unsaid, I think these things are never straightforward, binary. These things are kind of messy and nuanced, but you just move in the right direction.
yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And one of the And also, because also still a work in progress, right? And I was just going to say, one of the greatest lessons I've learned, and I would just be honest, because sometimes I forget that I've learned this lesson and I still want to not have learned this lesson, is that actually we're never done. The work in progress will continue forever. We're never going to be at a point. Like, so your thing might be external validation, just like one of my things is deeply believing that at my core, without having to prove or earn it, I am lovable and deserving of love. Right. And I can keep working on that and keep moving and moving up the scale and moving up the scale and moving up the scale. We're probably always going to be working on our version of that. And I think that when you get to that place of, I'm always going to be working on a version of this, and that's okay.
Mhm.
I don't need to like chase for this, like to be the finished article. Actually, a lot of the pain and suffering falls away.
Mhm.
But yes.
Yeah.
So if people want to like come and stalk you, check you out, find you, um, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, so I spend a lot of my life on LinkedIn, so
Yeah.
feel free to connect with me there. And then I'm always open to having a chat with anybody. It's something I always enjoy doing.
Okay, brilliant. So what we will do is we will get your LinkedIn link in the show
Mm.
notes if people want to go and do that. Um, Kamal, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being our first male guest. Males listening in, if you'd like
Mm.
to come on the podcast, balance things out a little bit, please get in touch. Um, is there any final remarks that you would like to make before we end today?
I say thank you to you, Louise. You've helped me out a fair bit, and it's great that we've been able to, even though we don't work together, it's sort of coach as coachee anymore.
Mhm.
You've I consider you to be a friend, and it's always nice to catch up. And it's so a huge thank you to you for all the work you do.
It's my absolute pleasure and same.
Mm.
Okay, thanks everybody. Check out the show notes for Camel's links, and I will see you next time. Bye.